Is that enough time?
I think so.
Thank you, Mark. That was good. Yeah.
The music quality is surprisingly good for a system that's probably all planned to do voice.
Yeah. Exactly.
So for the people who logged on recently, we're just giving everybody a few minutes to get here and get settled.
So let's go ahead and get started. I want to welcome everybody to BCI's first in what I hope will be a long series of webinars. We will be recording this webinar and be sending out the link to both people who attended as well as people who registered and weren't able to make it. So hopefully everybody will get a chance to see it and participate. The Zoom has the ability to ask some questions as we go along. There's a question and answer form in the background. Feel free to write in questions. I'm not sure, given that we have 6 speakers, that we'll be able to answer very many questions, if any, during the talk, but we will make best efforts to put them up and post them where we respond to the link. So feel free to ask any questions as we go. So I am Diana Newman. I'm the Executive Director of the Bace Cybersecurity Institute. Many of you may not have heard about us before, and so this is your first opportunity to learn a little bit about us. We have been created in honor of Becky Bace, who was a visionary and expert leader in cybersecurity. She had many wonderful writings that you can find online, but one of her real goals was, and what she really thought was a powerful way to change the world in cybersecurity, was to bring together people from government and academia, nonprofit, public sector, and commercial enterprises, and get input and feedback from everyone in different communities. Everybody has a different perspective on the world, and combining those perspectives is a way to really find and make a difference. And so we want to continue that work, and you can see from this talk that we have speakers in a wide variety of industries and perspectives. And we really believe that secure systems can help save lives, and that's what we're working to achieve. We have identified one of our starting points as working on resiliency, especially in highly complex systems. And I think that the complexity of the systems is something that has exponentially ballooned, and you see that both in the internet as well as some of the COVID-19 things like supply chains and so forth. And being able to identify and tinker with those complex systems is one of the really fun things I think about it. I started my career at Los Alamos, and this is where I met Becky. And we were working on an AI system for doing intrusion detection. Given the current art in cybersecurity, it would seem very familiar to those of us who work in the field. It was an expert AI-based system, and it had inputs like what time people logged in and how much work they were doing. And it was all working great until the assumptions changed, until there was a nuclear test ban treaty signed, and the next nuclear test would be the last nuclear test. And since Los Alamos is full of nuclear scientists, they all rushed to do as much much work as absolutely possible before their last test went off. And so they started logging in at 2 a.m., they started increasing the amount of activity exponentially, and the whole IDS basically collapsed because it said everything is an anomaly and everything should be stopped. And so it was turning people off and logging them out. And it was a huge deal. And so I think this is an example of these complex systems, is whether they're AI or whether they're internet, they become very black box. You know, you can't see exactly what's going on inside of them. And so these high periods of change like COVID-19 allow us to get a glimpse of what's going on in the box. They also allow attackers new opportunities, but we can use those opportunities to learn things about our systems, about our responses to those systems, and make a change for better. I hope that you enjoy these talks. I'm certainly looking forward to them. And I'm hoping that people will join us with their expertise, with their insights, with donations, or with, most importantly, their time, because none of this is possible without our volunteers and our sponsors. And so all of this work that you see behind me and behind this team is all volunteers. No one's getting paid, and our sponsors, particularly Barracuda and Micah Global, have put a huge amount of time into bringing together the talks and the logistics for doing this. So I really want to thank those people and our speakers and the companies that support them for giving them the opportunity to talk. And so with that, I'd like to hand it over to Mark, who is our CTO and has been instrumental in putting this all together.
Thank you, Diana. So today is kind of a smorgasbord, a sampler. We're going to have short talks by a number of people. We will follow in a series every other week with webinars on this subject. And the following webinars will be more detailed. We'll have fewer speakers, one or two, focusing on a very specific area and providing a lot more detail. We'll also have office hours on the following Wednesday. So, and you'll get an email that will explain when they'll be at the same time as this session. And those will be for discussions, for people to bring ideas, resources, potential actions that we can take together. If you're interested in speaking, you can join us for that. And it'll also be a chance to ask questions, because we're not going to have time for questions today. And the next webinar that will be in 2 weeks will be a more detailed view of the current attacks. And there will be 2 speakers, Fleming and Mark, who will give short presentations today. Next slide, please. Diana? Oh, there we go. So some people think this is a political problem. It's not really a political problem. It's a human nature problem, which makes it more difficult. When human beings get in a crisis, we respond to the crisis. But when the crisis is over, we try to forget about the crisis because it's unpleasant and it's not nice, and we try to focus on the nice and pleasant things. And so we don't learn from the past crisis and prepare to be in a better shape for the next one. And it's just human nature. And you can look at what we're dealing with now with COVID-19. It's depending on how you count, this has happened 3, 4, or 5 times before. And yet, every time we do the same thing. We spin up a lot of activity to deal with the problem. And then the minute that the problem kind of recedes into the background, all of that activity is abandoned and it turns into dust and just blows away. And we're not prepared for the next one. So my position here is that I think it's really important that we try to capture as much of what we can about the information that we're seeing now, and that we analyze it, and that we continue to analyze it and use it to prepare, to be better prepared for the next one. There is a lot of money, recovery money, coming out of the US government and out of other governments around the world focusing on the US government. I think it would be really helpful if some of that money were funneled through the National Institutes of Health, through NSF, NIST, DARPA, and they could make that money available to people to do the data collection and the analysis so that we can learn from it and be better prepared. And of course, BCI stands ready to do that. So without further ado, Fleming, please tell us a little bit about what is happening now.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm Fleming Shi from Barracuda Networks. It's great to be here with Bace, and have been with the company since 2004. And since the beginning, when we were building systems, we wanted to be able to track, malicious behaviors that we have seen in the field. So this is why we're able to identify the threats that's coming through, especially related to COVID-19 pandemic. What's really strike us is I wanted to point out these 4 elements that we have been tracking in March. In March timeframe, we actually saw over 600% increase because COVID-19 really started, obviously from China and reaching to Asia, and we wanted to monitor what's going on. And really until March, the attacks, the cyber attacks, start taking really drastic increase. And we saw, like I mentioned, 600% plus increase in March timeframe. We're still monitoring that today, and we still have new information I'd like to share as we move along, but the angles are changing. So this is obviously kind of, for us, is a little bit of a surprise because, how low the attackers are getting to. They're actually increasingly targeting people, leveraging their fear and anxiety. And this anxiety is not necessarily only about the drug, but also related to people moving goods to actually protect people, medical equipments, logistics related attacks that basically highlights how they want to disrupt the process. And we believe that is the new low, like I mentioned in the slide. To me, it's a moral bankruptcy of the attackers. They're really leveraging this type of situation against people. So it's important to also realize some of the attacks are, obviously, we have seen plenty of links, phishing links, impersonations, as well as malware. So malware that could be actually hiding behind the links could actually be ransomware. Sometimes there are Trojans. They become password stealers that actually can track and crack your password and eventually utilize those passwords for other attacks, right? So, but beyond that, what we have started to see is also sentiment intent-based, attacks, which really it's all based on text message inside the body of the email. And what's really interesting is these attacks are obviously harder to detect because there's no artifact to scan or sandbox or to run against to ensure, oh, this email is actually malicious. In those situations, we're obviously going to rely on systems that actually can analyze the intent and understand what is really the social graph of your users, how do they communicate normally, who do they communicate, and when, and what type of topic they actually cover. And from those type of models, we can actually detect anomalies and dive into the potential threats that's involved here. And it's important to also pay attention to, obviously Barracuda offers many products in different threat vectors, attack surfaces, but email still is really a lot of the entry points are coming through email. We have seen this obvious increase really related to email attacks. And some of these are going to require not only just your system to protect your users, but also training your users, right? And how do you become better at defending yourself against threats like, especially sentiment and intent based, if it's not related to a document. So I believe in the next session, which is 2 weeks from now, our goal is to dive into some of the attacks and actually, dissect some of the weapons that's being used. That'll be really interesting to actually share with you and hopefully build up awareness as well as defenses. And what's coming next, really, what we have seen is, I believe there's several phases in the pandemic. Initially, it's really, actually related to scams that's like charities, fake charities and things like that. But next, the current phase we're starting to see in actually April timeframe. Originally, it's we have seen obviously the seasonal attacks back in the years where there's no COVID-19, but the tax related, seasonal attacks. But now we're actually related to COVID-19. We're seeing like fake vaccines, right? And the people who are building the PPEs, as well as people are manufacturing, ventilators, things like that. Those are the manufacturers getting targeted, right? So generally, we'll share more of that in multiple phases, because I believe the pandemic is going to last a while. Along the way, we're going to continue to see some logistics related attacks, because that's not going to end. It's I would say a lot of equipment as well as medical goods are moving around. So that's going to be still there. But additionally, we're going to see fake vaccines. The WHO impersonations are going to change. And next thing we're going to get to is probably related to stimulus, dollars that moving into small, medium-sized businesses as well as enterprises. We will see, my prediction is those are going to eventually ramp up. So Diana, we can move to the next slide again, talk about the taxonomy a little bit. So from our March observations, we have seen large amount of scams, as well as brand impersonation and blackmail. Just a couple of touch points, as I mentioned in the last slide. There's one thing that is really kind of hitting hard, related to the I would say intent-based. Some of the attacks are actually utilizing ransomware, but not using actual encryption of your files to actually hold the ransom. They're actually holding kind of the hostage of, they're saying, hey, we're going to infect your family and friends if you don't actually execute on transferring Bitcoins using this Bitcoin information. So point there is, there's no single link on that kind of attack. There's no attachment in there. It's really a threat, right? So I just want to make sure, that's why we call it the new low. And also it's really hard to detect something like that. So in addition to your ATP kind of solutions, you have to have some level of machine trained systems to analyze the intent and understand the social graph and the user community communication patterns beyond what advanced threat protection can provide. Other than that, there's another one that is we'll probably cover next time in detail. It's credential thefting. So you probably seen fake Office 365 logins, and just say, hey, we have a file to share with you. Here's the SharePoint, but when you click on it, it actually goes into Google APIs, for example. Totally legitimate site, services provided by Google, but bad guys have figured out a way to leverage that, and because obviously the URL is trusted, but behind it, what they have done is they actually scraped a login for someone's Office 365 login. So from there, they can actually harvest your credentials. That's actually a pretty, I will call it not super sophisticated, but it's so easy for them to create, and people fall for it, right? And obviously, the more sophisticated credential thefting goes along with Trojans that gets dropped into your system. And I can show you examples next time in an email, how real it looks. And from there, if you open the file, it will install the Trojan. And from there, it can actually start doing bad things to your system and steal your passwords. But generally, these are the different categories that we're seeing. And I think some of these we're going to talk about them in detail. Meantime, we're going to hopefully identify the new threats and new angles the attackers are using and share with you in the future webinars. So that said, I think I covered my 8 minutes, I think, Diana. I'd like to introduce Mark from Okta, VP of Cyber at this moment.
Thank you, and welcome everyone. As mentioned, I'm the VP of Cyber at Okta, but I'm also one of the founders of an organization called the CTI League. The League is essentially cybersecurity professionals all over the world who are volunteering their time after work to counter the threats that we just heard about. It is an unprecedented time. We've never seen this volume of attacks coming from country to country. In fact, we've started calling it a world cyber war because there are literally attacks in every language known to man coming from every country and going to every country. And it poses a huge problem because on the law enforcement side of things, how do you drink from the fire hose and select the right things to protect the nation against? And on the cybersecurity side, how do you know which of the threats that are the ones that you should be focusing on and which are the ones that you should be spending less time on? So we decided we'd use our spare time to pull together a team of people and focus on that particular problem and clear as much of the playing field as possible. If you go on to the next slide, you'll see that, well, things got a little bit out of hand. We now have members in 76 different countries, and our growth curve went from just a couple of us up to now 1,400 working full-time on this project. And it's actually kind of a heartwarming thing to see this human response. Everybody around the world sees the threat, and everybody around the world wants to do something about it. And that level of collaboration has led to some really unusual and very effective partnerships. We have a significant number of law enforcement members from multiple different countries within our organization. We have agencies within our organization. We have industry bodies within our organization. And of course, we have cybersecurity professionals, but from every walk of life. So there are incident responders, threat hunters, malware analysts, red teamers, everything you can imagine. Somebody has something to contribute because this problem is just incredibly expansive. There are a lot of bad guys who are leveraging this as a gold rush. So I think, as you heard in the previous slides, there's a new low. And part of that is because there are so many people trying to exploit this situation, they're just throwing whatever they've got. And so in some cases, they're reskinning malware or reskinning phishing attacks or ransomware and sending it out. In other cases, they're just sending threatening messages out. But whatever they can get and whatever they can get their hands on, they're throwing at us. And so some of it's actually quite easy for us to detect, but other things become a little bit more challenging to detect. And so we've had to break up into work streams where, if you like, we clear the road as much as possible, taking out the low-hanging fruit, but then spend a little bit more time analyzing the bigger stuff so that we can tear it down and understand the threats that it represents. If you move to the next slide, we've actually been pretty successful. So in a little over 3 weeks, we've managed to take down 2,833 malicious domains. Now, when I say the malicious domains, I'm talking about essentially IOCs, indicators of compromise, that come from multiple sources. So these are phishing endpoints that were trying to do things like credential scraping or malware dropping, but these are also from tearing down pieces of malware and finding the command and control infrastructure. Our process is, if we find anything that we identify as being malicious, we analyze it. And if we consider it to be relatively harmless, as in it's just like I say just, but if it's a phishing email or it's an attempt at stealing credentials or it's a simplistic form of malware or a very well-known piece of malware, We just work on immediately neutralizing it. We take it down. We use the existing processes to take it down. So we're not doing any kind of active attacks against these guys. We're just using the tools and knowledge that we've gained from our day-to-day jobs. But because we're all so well connected to each other, because we're all in the same room, we're literally able just to say, hey, I need to take down this thing in Poland. Is there anybody from Poland here? And 5 guys will say, we're from Poland. Do you know this registrar? Yep, we know this registrar. Here's what we have. They'll analyze it, find it violates an abuse policy, and take it down. And the results have been that we can take things down that would normally take weeks because of siloing and policy barriers. We can take them down in a matter of hours or days. One of my favorite examples, unfortunately, I can't name the institute because I don't want to name and shame anyone who's been attacked, was we found a major vulnerability in a governmental infrastructure that was being exploited by bad guys. These bad guys were using that infrastructure to relay malware through. And by working with the government organizations, the system owners, and working with our security people, we were able to attack the problem at both ends and shut the whole thing down in 3 hours. Now that's the kind of response that any well-seated enterprise would be proud to claim credit for. Next slide. So the next thing we're doing, and actually the primary focus of the group, is that we came together to protect the medical industry. We realized from events like WannaCry and NotPetya that somebody needs to be there to protect them. When WannaCry and NotPetya hit institutions across the world, it caused immense disruption. They shut things down. At this time of immense stress and capacity overload, if something like this was to take out critical infrastructure, it would be a disaster, and it would literally mean human lives. And so we're actively trying to get ahead of it. We're looking for vulnerabilities by using open source intelligence tools like Shodan, by sucking vulnerabilities down from the dark web, from the internet, etc. And then we triage them all. Once we've triaged them, we then escalate them either through an industry organization like the Health ISAC, or through our partners in government, our partners in agency services, foreign governments, foreign law enforcement, and get it reported to the system owners so that they can then take affirmative action. We don't do anything direct to the institutions ourselves because we don't want to be responsible for breaking anything. But what you can see on the screen is just a sample of some of the things we found in the first week. There's a lot of old stuff that we would have expected to be fixed that's still out there and still very exposed to the internet. So we're literally constantly churning through these and finding new vulnerabilities on a constant basis. If you go to our website, which is cti-league.com, we've published a report on our first month's activity, and I'm very proud of what the team has accomplished, and would invite anyone out there who wants to be part of this kind of activity to come and join us. And with that, I'll whistle stop tour. I'll leave you with my my colleague Joel.
All right, thank you, Mark. Very interesting discussion points. A lot of the same things we're kind of seeing. So I'm basically the CTO for an MSSP. So we've got a large number of clients kind of spread across all different industries. I'll give a healthcare example here towards the end of this, because I think it's amazing how much targeting is going towards them. Overall, this is sort of the activity, as you've seen in a number of these other presentations already. Over our entire customer base, we've seen just flat out attack activity up over 40%. And most of this is against cloud infrastructures that people are moving towards. The interesting thing that Fleming said right away is the phishing attacks and things like that are primarily where people are getting hit. It's not the smart bad guys that are getting through right now. It's a lot of the dumb bad guys that people are just, they're falling for it right now because they're just not as, security is not on top of their minds. Go ahead and go to the next slide. The next slide's got most of my stuff in there. So the pandemic has really changed our customers. I think some of the things that we've seen overall is most companies were not ready for this remote work capability. The vast majority of them have, basically changed their entire infrastructure and the way they were set up to be able to support remote workers. We've got customers who didn't want to pay for the VPN licenses, the additional VPN licenses they would need for all of their customers, so they just opened up RDP to the world. We started showing them the RDP attacks that were coming against them, and then they started to say, okay, maybe I should actually, lock down RDP to, one particular. I mean, my employees can't leave their house, so we know what their IP address is. Let's lock down the RDP if we have to use it. The RDP attacks we've seen have more than tripled. This was basically a week ago. That number's almost 5 times. If I look at where it is from, that's just in a week. We have a number of customers who, rather than, because they couldn't do VPN or couldn't do, RDP, didn't want to do RDP, they have been doing a bunch of, like the O365 usage within our customers has doubled. They're just sending everybody to the cloud. And the cloud attacks, I mean, the number of breaches that we're dealing with right now has doubled in the past month. And 90% of them are phishing and a lot of O365 breaches that, people are just doing dumb stuff. So I think the major thing that we're seeing from our customers is that they were not ready from as an organization to change once everybody said, hey, you can't come into the office, you have to work at home. And as we look to help customers long term, as we're supposed to be a partner of theirs, helping them understand what it would take to do this is one of the things that we're looking at doing a lot of. And we're doing a lot more interactive discussions with our customers now, because we're seeing the number of attacks are completely different than they were, a month ago. One of the bullets on here is the behavioral indicators are less effective. One of the things that Diane talked about with the IPS system in Los Alamos, we're seeing the exact same thing happen here. All of the baselines that our systems used a month and a half ago are completely busted, right? So a lot of the behavioral products that we use in the back end are really struggling to reset every dial that's out there. So, the idea of, there's some things that are working very well. There's some things that are not. And what's the difference and what has changed based on, what is happening at our customers right now. VPN and remote access, the VPN, the number of impossible login type scenarios that we've seen over the past month, where someone logs in from the US and then they also log in from Russia at the same time. The number of those alerts has just gone through the roof, because everybody's using some sort of remote access, whether it's VPN or whatever. That's really gone through it's prolific, like you've heard from some of the other speakers already. The healthcare example that I was going to talk about, the healthcare market is definitely not immune. We've seen providers that we deal with, attacks are up 30% across the board. We even have one provider that we worked with, and again, not naming names or anything, but they moved to a cloud service a few months back. That is a security service that's handling their endpoints. Bad guy got in to the cloud portal, reset their security, and then was able to basically throw ransomware out on everything in this healthcare provider. And these guys are, they're right in the middle of a big, in COVID-19 response. Are they not going to pay the ransom? No. I mean, everybody's paying right now. You'd be able, this is, it was one of those things where within, the attack took 2 minutes to pull off, and then they ended up with, a big payday. And there was no way this healthcare company would say, I'm going to take a week to shut down and go just rebuild my systems. So, I mean, that's part of the problem as well, is you don't have time to respond in the way that you might have responded in the past because of the pandemic and other things that are going on. Those are my slides. Just wanted to kind of talk about the difference that we're seeing, not just from the number of attacks, but from the response of customers and companies that were not ready for this in any way, shape, or form, and how they need to change their thinking and we're trying to help them figure out, how can they be better next time? Or, why did you make the dumb mistakes you made? Most of it's because they didn't have any choice. So they're not putting security first. And how can we help them be better prepared for something like this, as it goes on. With that being said, I will hand it over to Nina. She'll take over from here. Thank you.
I have asked for a better segue into this. So I kind of changed the title to Joint Lessons from the COVID Crisis because it wasn't a learn from each other. It was more about how can we get together and work this through. Next slide, please. So definitions for everyone, because I'm not quite sure where we're starting. So I wanted to get everybody on the same place. So security researchers, also known as hackers sometimes, skilled computer experts in doing things to overcome problems, whereas biohackers are also known as citizen scientists because we function and focus on DIY biology, biotechnology, biosecurity, DIY biology, doing things on your own with yourself as the object that you're going to change to overcome the problem. Next slide, please. So a lot of folks in tech don't understand the body, where the same thing is true of the opposite side, whereas the body doesn't, the body folks, the physicians and such, don't understand tech. But if you look at it, it's all the same system of systems. So we'll start at very small organelles, cells, it's actually the other way. So it's cells, organelles, organs, systems, organism itself. And it's the same thing with a computer. We start out very small components. We end up with a large computer. Next slide, please. So here, I wanted to focus again on things that brought us together rather than brought us apart. So during the COVID crisis, what ended up happening was a lot of the industry folks got together with the DoD and said, we need a lot more help because we can't transition as quickly as other folks can. And this ended up becoming a task force of sorts where the industry, DoD, government came over into the science, the citizen science people and said, we need your help because you can do more with less. A lot of what we do is we're really good at improvising. We take small things, we plan it out to completion, and we go through the next part with it, which is the scientific method, asking ourselves all these different questions to think out the problem because, again, more with less, we don't have a lot of resources. So we have to ensure that when we do an experiment, that it's going to be precise, it's going to give us the results that we're looking for. And as far as nomenclature is concerned, we have to get everyone speaking the same language because I know what an organelle is, I know what a system of things is as far as the bio side is concerned, as well as the tech side and the sex side, where, as Joel was saying, the hospitals don't really understand sec or tech and they're just like, cool, you do a thing, yes. And the problem with them saying you do a thing, yes, is that they don't understand it. And if they don't understand it, they can't control it. Also, when we work with measurements, we work with the metric system because the imperial system, which the Americans use, is based on medieval times. So if you didn't know that, there's your fun fact for this whole conference. Also, a lot of what we do as security folks, we function with workflows and threat models. We need to know where everything is at all times so that we can do a lot of asset management, where hospitals don't necessarily do that or do it well. One of the things with security is if you've seen one system, you've seen one system. So whether that be technical, security, biological, or otherwise, you've only seen one. So we all need to understand in security and in biology where something lives, why it's going wrong, why it's going right, and how to protect it, and we have to document that better. Also, for digital forensics and incident response, we don't, biohackers and the medical community don't really do that well because we function more by reaction rather than proactive. So with DFIR, it's super important for large vulnerable areas with multi-platform systems like the human body or computer systems because of their risk and how it exponentially increases when high levels of data start coming in. And so we have to figure out how to better control those alerts, the history, and the responses. As far as your team is concerned, it's the same as when you're building out a new project, whether that be in human form or in technical form. You need a team of rivals to have conversations with you. So have the folks that are going to question you to death, have the ones that are going to tell you everything you need to know, And more importantly, need the people that are not afraid to say, I don't understand, I don't know, so that you can break these things down, document everything efficiently and effectively, and come away from this with more solid value and scientific validity. And one of the things that we do in science is we function by showing how valid our science is with efficacy. I may be messing that up. Efficacy, sorry, I always do that. Efficacy and efficiency, and also specificity and sensitivity. So I have to read those definitions off because even I always mess them up. So efficacy is the performance of an intervention under ideal and controlled circumstances, like when you're in the lab. And then where effectiveness is when it's out in the real world situation. And then sensitivity in the lab is the percentage of persons with the disease who are correctly identified by the test, whereas specificity is the percentage of people without the disease who are correctly excluded by the test. That is a lot to take in, and I am totally aware of that. So we can do a data download later on that. And then the last one that's always so important, and I think a lot of people forget, is provenance. It is so important to show your facts and show what you did and how you made whatever logic come about and publish it. And if you're not going to publish it, at least do a talk about it, because there are certainly other people that are working on very similar projects or projects that may just completely be not cool with you. And we still need to publish and talk about those things because they are still being worked on. So the communities are actually really related to each other, and whether we work together or separately, we're still solving robust problems and have a lot of solutions between ourselves. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Mark.
Thank you, Nina. So you've seen today that we have a little kind of a cross section of subjects that are related to this crisis and how we're dealing with it today, and what we can do to learn from today to be better prepared for tomorrow. We will have office hours. The office hours will be at the same time as this webinar a week from today. We will send registration information and follow-up information shortly after the webinar. The next webinar will be in 2 weeks, and it'll be more detailed view of current attacks by Fleming and Mark. I really encourage you to come to the office hours, bring your questions, bring your ideas, your contributions. We'd like to turn this into more action. Of course, we start out with talk, but we hope that the talking leads to action. And Diana, I was going to turn it back to you. There have been a couple questions that have come up in the chat window about the availability of a recording of this and about the availability of the slides and where and when they will be. So I would hope that you would talk about that a little bit, Diana. And I just want to reinforce this final point. There is all this recovery money coming out, and even just a small portion of that, we're dedicated to capturing information about this crisis and better preparing for next crisis. That would be really wonderful. And there are governmental organizations that are prepared and organized to manage the distribution of funds for this purpose. In the US, it's the National Science Foundation, DARPA, the National Institutes of Health. In Europe, it's ETSI, and in individual other countries around the world, in Asia, and as well as Europe and North America and the Middle East. There are organizations that are specifically designed to do this, and I'm hoping that we can engage some of them. So thank you for coming, and Diana, I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, so Mark mentioned that there'd been some questions about where we will post this recording. We should send out a link directly. I think it'll take us about a day, and it'll have a link that has the recording of this session. If there are any questions, feel free to ask in the Zoom, or you can send us an email directly at info@bacesecurity.org. We're happy to help link people up with some of the speakers here that have talked today, or if you have general questions, we're happy to answer those. I really want to thank everybody for contributing, both our volunteers, as I mentioned, and Barracuda for hosting us today, as well as all of our speakers. I really enjoyed the talks, and I think I learned some really surprising facts out of what's going on, and some really interesting ways of perceiving the problem and moving forward. So that's what I'm looking forward to, and I hope that you will join us. So I think with that, we're done. Thank you again for all of our speakers.
Great.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
See you in 2 weeks.